Hello and welcome to the Map Talk on Tucson's housing market. I'm Jennifer Pullen, a senior research economist in the Economic and Business Research Center and the Making Action Possible Map Dashboard Coordinator. Today's Map Talk is sponsored by the Community Foundation for Southern Arizona and the University of Arizona. We have a great lineup of guest speakers to talk about the growth, gaps, and vulnerability in today's housing market. Today, we're excited to welcome, hopefully my slides will advance here, Alicia Kim, a research economist in the Economic and Business Research Center at the University of Arizona. Ann Chineka, the Deputy Director of Housing and Community Development at the City of Tucson. Marcos Ismael, the Housing Program Manager at the Pima County Community and Workforce Development Department. And T. Van Hook, the CEO at the Habitat for Humanity in Tucson. Welcome. We're really excited to have all of you join us today. We'll do more formal introductions of each of our speakers prior to their presentations. But first, let's go through some of the logistics for today's talk. Today's talk will be recorded. So we record all of our map talks and we post them on the Map Dashboard website. You can find it posted there later this evening or by tomorrow afternoon at the latest. Everyone will be, the webinar is in conference mode, meaning everyone but the presenters will be muted. And then you'll have time, we'll have about 20 minutes or so for question and answers at the end of the presentation. So we'll go through all 4 of our presentations today, and then we'll open up to question and answers. There's a question and answer box at the bottom of your screens. You can submit your questions there, or you can send them directly to George Hammond via his email at ghammond@arizona.edu. I'd like to take a moment to thank our MAP partners and sponsors who make the Map Talks possible. Our sustaining sponsors include Tucson Electric Power, the Thomas R. Brown Family Foundation, and the Freeport McMoran Foundation. Our partners include the Community Foundation for Southern Arizona, Pima Association of Governments, Southern Arizona Leadership Council, Sun Corridor, and the University of Arizona. Additionally, I'd like to acknowledge our media sponsor, the Arizona Daily Star. We publish 2 map features each month in the Star. The first Monday of each month, you can find a health section feature on the front page of the health section. And then the last Sunday, we have a business section feature each month. And then finally, I'm excited to announce that the Map Dashboard just recently was awarded the Research Award for Data Collection, Dissemination, and Visualization from C2ER. The Council for Community and Economic Research. I'd now like to welcome Mark Montoya, the Interim President, CEO, and COO of the Community Foundation for Southern Arizona.
Thank you, Jennifer. On behalf of the Community Foundation for Southern Arizona and the Map Dashboard, I would like to welcome everyone to today's Map Talk and want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today to provide valuable insight into understanding the Tucson housing market. As a reminder to everyone on the call that the Map Dashboard is your community resource, and I would encourage you, if you have not done so, go to the Map Dashboard website. Also, I would encourage you to submit a question online, to reach out to Jennifer or George, who have valuable information and resources, and it's a knowledge center for our community. Again, I appreciate you joining us today, and please enjoy the Map Talk. Back to you, Jennifer.
Thanks so much, Mark. We really value the Community Foundation's support of the Map Dashboard. And now I'd like to welcome Alicia Kim. She's a research economist in the Economic and Business Research Center at the University of Arizona. Welcome, Alicia. Prior to joining EBRC, Alicia worked as a financial manager for the Department of Defense, spending a considerable amount of time supporting U.S. military objectives in the Middle East. She also taught predictive modeling, research design, statistics, and conflict studies at the University of Texas at Dallas, as well as micro and macroeconomics at the University of Maryland University College. She's an AmeriCorps service alum, having taught financial literacy to the general public in the Oklahoma Money Matters program. She holds a BS in finance and an MS in economics from Oklahoma State University, as well as an MS in GIS and a PhD in public policy from the University of Texas at Dallas. Welcome, Alicia. You can start your screen share whenever you're ready.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. All right, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to take us just through a walkthrough of our housing market study. The EBRC, the City of Tucson, and Pima County collaborated on this for basically the whole year of the pandemic to produce this, to collect all the data, design, and then put this into operation as a community resource. So we hope that everybody can benefit from it, whatever your question may be about the housing market in Tucson. There's 3 phases. We started with a neighborhood vulnerability index. Then we moved on to a housing market assessment, and finally we did a gap analysis. So I'm going to walk through all 3 phases here, but I just wanted this overview page, which is where you'll go from the link on the map dashboard homepage, just has a little summary of each of the phases. And then you can just click on any of these buttons to get to whichever one you're interested in. For example, the neighborhood vulnerability index. And if you want to go back to that main page, then you just click here in the menu. So we're going to start with the neighborhood vulnerability index. So our goal here, the goal of this first phase of the study, was to identify those vulnerable or stressed neighborhoods within our region. So we created a neighborhood vulnerability index, and we actually modeled it after a study from the University of Texas at Austin. So what we mean by vulnerability is that we looked at the socioeconomic characteristics of households and neighborhoods that might determine that neighborhood's collective ability to prepare for or cope with hazard events. So at the time that we actually came up with this definition and started collecting the data to make the index, we didn't know that the pandemic was going to happen. But what we mean by a hazard event is a natural public health or economic disaster that kind of suddenly befalls either, an MSA, a state, a region, or in this case, the whole world. And what we're looking at when we mean vulnerable is that we mean that there's not just a disproportionate effect of the disaster on that neighborhood, but also possibly in that neighborhood's ability for long-term recovery. So the 5 factors, we came up with 5 factors of vulnerability to kind of create this composite score of vulnerability. And they're listed here, being the percent of residents that identify as anything other than non-Hispanic white alone in the Census American Communities Survey. Surveys. The percent of households who rent rather than own, the percent of residents that are age 25 or over who do not have a 4-year bachelor's degree or higher, the percent of households with incomes below the 80% area median income, and the share of children that live in households below the official poverty line. Now, we do have a methodology tab here in this menu that will tell you much more about how we created the composite score. And just as a summation of all of that, basically a neighborhood was vulnerable if it was vulnerable in 3 or more of these 5 factors. So we discovered which neighborhoods, and by neighborhood here, we're talking about census tracts in Pima County. We're using Pima County because Pima County is in fact also a metropolitan statistical area, according to the census. That made it easy for us to separate and look at the population of Tucson and Pima County in smaller groups. And we found, according to this map here, which tracts were vulnerable and not vulnerable. We had this 3-part scale of vulnerability, meaning that you were vulnerable, and not you, but the tract was vulnerable, more vulnerable, or most vulnerable, according to the scale of the index. What this is showing you here is every tract in Pima County. Now, on any of the maps that are in this whole study, you can zoom in and you can actually find your tract according, you can zoom in and see all the streets. You can find where your house is. You can't see houses here, but you can find, your intersection, your actual street, the more you zoom into the map. So you can find your tract and you can find all the information about your actual tract on any of these maps. So what we found was that about 42 or almost 43% of census tracts in Pima County are in fact vulnerable in some way. 87 of those are within the City of Tucson boundaries. And so that kind of led us down this path of trying to find out, what that means for Tucson and Pima County. This tab here just shows where we were in 2013, which is the directly comparable ACS survey that we can directly compare to the 2018 data that was available when we were building this this tool. So you just can check that out, but the most interesting thing is kind of how we changed. How did Tucson change between 2013 and 2018? So which tracks became vulnerable when they weren't previously, or became not vulnerable and improved between those two time periods? So what we found was that there were 30 tracks that experienced change in vulnerability between 2013 and the 2013 and 2018 surveys. 16 went from not vulnerable to vulnerable, while 13 went from vulnerable to not vulnerable. And what we found there was that the change between 2013 and 2018 was mostly in the factor of the percentage of children, or the share of children that were living in poverty. So if a census tract improved, it was mostly because less children were living in poverty in that census tract. If it did not improve and in fact became vulnerable over that time period, then it was usually because more children were living in poverty in that census tract. This is the methodology tab where you can read all about our methodology, how we came to this composite score and how we measured it. And luckily, this entire methodology is replicable, meaning that with future data, so the census comes out with new updated data every year with a new ACS survey. That means we could do this all over again to update all of this data for the current time period. So phase 2 was the housing market assessment overview. And what we were trying to do here was look at a snapshot of the characteristics of the Tucson area housing market. And we picked all these different characteristics that we wanted to highlight and kind of make this a community resource where you could come and look and see, what the housing market looks like. In this, most of this data is from the 2018 5-year American Community Survey, although we do have some more current data from Zillow on housing market prices. But still, this is a snapshot of what the housing market looks like. So we started with home prices. We know that the majority of households in the Tucson region own their home, but that housing prices vary widely across the city and within Pima County. So here's one example of when we use the Zillow index. So this is the Zillow price index. It gives us housing prices over time, all the way back to 1996 to the beginning of 2020. And we have it separated here by zip code. The really great thing about all of the charts that you'll see here in this study and across the map dashboard are the dynamic legends, where you can click on and off those zip codes that are of interest to you. So if you don't like the default ones, you can just click them off, find your zip code, the zip codes around you, or the zip codes that you're interested in, and just click on them to change the map. Also, if you scroll over here, it tells you for everything that's been clicked on, it tells you the value, the housing price value at whatever point in time for the whole range of what you clicked on. So we also compared these prices, by tract, because this is by zip code here, and then we mapped it here. We mapped all the zip codes here and put the median price for that zip code on the map. We also compared the home values over the last decade, just to show how prices were changing. So we can see how there was this big drop. This period was kind of when the housing bubble had burst, but then there was a kind of slow recovery out of the Great Recession for housing prices. We also have maps showing like how home price growth by census tract. Almost all of the maps, except for the zip code one, show everything by census tract. And like I told you, you can zoom into any of them and get to street level to find the exact location that you're interested in. You can also click on these links for full screen maps to get a bigger view of just the map if you really want to do some digging into the map. So this is, and finally, we compared home prices across the, let's see, we've got 12 across the 12 Western MSAs, Western metropolitan areas that we compare to on the map dashboard. So across the map dashboard, we make these comparisons to these other Western MSAs, and we did that here as well, comparing home prices in Tucson to across the Western US. So for example, if we want to look at Las Vegas or San Diego, then you can click on and off these also to find the comparison that you're looking for. So let me go back up. We did the same type of analysis for the rental market. I'm not going to go through this whole page. It's almost exactly the same as home prices, just for rents. Housing cost burden was also something really important to us that we wanted to look at, because what this tells us, it basically reflects the households that are paying greater than 30% of their income on housing costs. And what we know just historically is that households that are cost burdened are more likely to struggle to pay for other basic needs, such as healthcare, childcare, transportation, and possibly even food. So we looked at the percent of housing cost burdened households in Tucson. This is divided by owner and renter. And we also know this, that renters tend to be more housing cost burdened than those households that actually own their home. We split it out in these maps about the housing cost burden among homeowners. And so you can click through here. We have it at different burden levels. So you can see like what percentage of households in a given tract are burdened at a particular income level. And then we have that same kind of map for renters. Then we also go through housing characteristics, where we look at age, type, and vacancy. So for example, age, we have this nifty little animation here that's showing housing units built across the decades in Tucson. It's about to start over. We can see here in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s that housing was being built within the city. And then look here in the 70s, this is when we started branching out into the outer areas. And then this right here, when it goes kind of blank, is when the housing bubble started. So the animation goes a little fast. So if you want to look at any decade that you're interested in, you just go here, pick the decade. For example, in the 60s, we were still building mostly within the city. Then in the 70s, we started building all these areas outside of city limits. That continued even through 2000 to 2009. Look at this, like so many housing units were being built really everywhere. And then we all know what happened at the end of that decade. And then all of a sudden you can see how we go from 2009 with all of this building going on, like, you know, up to 3,050 units in a single tract to, I mean, building just stopped. So you can look at that, and then 2014 and after, we can see that we're still trying to catch up with continuing to build new units, you know, around Pima County. You can also look at type of housing characteristics, which tells us, for example, that almost 2/3 of housing in the Tucson MSA is a one-unit detached structure. That the majority, we can see this from this information right here, that the majority of housing is 2 or 3 bedrooms. And then we also took a look at vacancy, which, you know, tells us if we know that a low vacancy rate signals a housing shortage, you know, while the other side of that imbalance is a vacancy rate that is very high, meaning that we have a lot of empty houses. We also compared those vacancy rates across to Phoenix because we're interested in that. We found that Tucson, the US, Tucson, and Phoenix have almost the exact same vacancy rate in 2018, although the state of Arizona was slightly higher if we're looking outside the metro areas. We have a little bit about new home construction, which if you're interested in what happened during the housing crash, you can see that these are building permits over time, going all the way back to 1970. So this is really good time series data that we have shown here. And we can see this huge drop, which is during the Great Recession. What we can also see from this is that, you know, recovery from that, at least in terms of building, has been pretty slow and has not gone back to pre-recession levels. Finally, we have this page about affordable housing, which also leads us into the gap analysis. But this page right here kind of tells us where affordable housing is around the Tucson MSA. Also the types that are available, and then we're showing it in this map here by ward. So we know that Ward 2, for example, has the smallest number of public housing units, while Ward 3 has the, so Ward 2 is over here, and then Ward 3 has the highest number of public housing units. So that map shows us that information. We also have some stuff in Section 8 and showing, locations. These maps don't zoom in as close just for people's privacy, but showing, the distribution of this kind of housing, affordable housing around Tucson, the city of Tucson, and Pima County, and then some more about that and the low-income housing tax credit program. So that is our housing market assessment. And finally, our gap analysis. So the goal of this gap analysis, this is our third phase, our third and final phase, and the goal here was to identify the groups or characteristics of households that are not well served in the Tucson housing market. So we did first this overview that showed us population growth in the Tucson MSA just over time since 1990. And we can see, except for this little blip right here, which was during the Great Recession, so there's pretty steady population growth. And then we can see housing growth by decade. What we can see here is that in this decade, the 90s, and then in the early 2000s, that our new housing units, this blue bar, exceeded our average household increase. So we were keeping up with population growth there and housing demand. But we can see in our current, or not our current, but just the last decade, the 2010s, that we just kind of slightly didn't meet that. Well, that wasn't enough because of all this excess or surplus housing, new housing in the previous decades. So this little decrease here wasn't enough to make a shortage of housing. And so what this tells us is that we do have enough housing in the Tucson area for the people in the Tucson area. But what we also know is that it's not affordable to everybody. And that's what the challenge is. So we did this, little analysis right here showing, affordability of housing in Tucson and the Tucson MSA according to, hypothetical household situations, earning situations. So these are all hypothetical. We use some common occupations from the Tucson MSA and then estimated the max rent that they could afford per month and also the maximum home price if they were to buy a home. So you can see, like if you're a part-time retail worker in the Tucson MSA, that it's really difficult to find, for example, a rental place that is at or less than $325 a month. And we already knew this. We already knew this on a previous, from our previous housing market assessment. The rental household burden by income is quite high. So for example, look here at those incomes. This is annual income of a household of less than $20,000 a year. That almost 90% of households with this income are housing cost burdened if they're renting. And we can see as income goes up, housing cost burden goes down, this little blue bar. So if you're a household making more than $75,000 a year in the Tucson area and renting, you are very likely not housing cost burdened. So we had a lot of information about like what kinds of housing were available for renters in the Tucson MSA. So what we did was we took all of that information, all the different types of housing available to us, and then we made this model. And I want to stress that this is just one model for how Tucson's renters might be sorted in our housing market. We put a lot of thought into this dynamic to show like how complex the challenge really is to get affordable housing for people and to make housing available for people at all these income levels. And so for example, if you're in this group that's less than $20,000 in household income, and we already know that you can only afford about $500 in rent a month to be not cost burdened in your housing costs, then there's very, very few units available, only about, just over 4,000 units available for less than $500 a month. And then there's more that are available in this range. But if you've gone over $500 a month, then you're already cost burdened as a renter with that annual income. So these people have to rent. Most of the people with those incomes have to rent in this range, when really it's people, households that have income of 20 to 35,000 that are trying to rent in this range. Well, because there's not enough housing available for them at that range, they also start going up into higher ranges of rent. And what we also know is that there's not a whole lot of housing at this really high rental value either. So people with these households with these very high incomes, well, they're kind of spilling over into these lower rent ranges. One, because those are the units that are available to them, but also because a lot of people probably don't want to budget and be at that threshold for being cost burdened in their housing costs. So what this is meant to show is just this really complex dynamic about how rental households are sorted in the housing market. So you can scroll over any of these. I don't know if the pop-up is showing. It doesn't always show on a screen share, but if it's not, when you hold over any of these, a pop-up showing like how much each of these, the numerical value of each of these threads in the graphic. We also have some information about owner household burden, but we also know, as we showed before, that owners are far less cost burdened. And so we have that same kind of decreasing dynamic as incomes grow, but also it's far less. So that's the overview of the gap analysis. I'm just going to show just one of the groups of households that we focus on, because all of these three right here, older adults, housing by ethnicity, and housing by race, follow the same blueprints and show the same things. So we looked at the population of older adults. We wanted to see, like, what is the situation of housing for older adults in the Tucson area? We know that older adult households make up a fairly good share of households in the Tucson MSA at just over 29%. And I do want to qualify that an older adult household is one where the primary ACS respondent, so the survey respondent, was 65 years or older. But this could be a household with other family members that are younger than 65. So we also found that a very large share of older adults, at least in the 65 to 74 years old and 75 to 84 years old range, own their homes, right? And that's the highest share in the age bracket. But the renter share increases after householders reach the age of 85 plus. And we think that that's just showing us how older adults might transition away from independent living. We did look to see how many older adult households that we thought that the data showed that were at or below the 50% area median income for two people, which we just made the assumption that most older adult households are in fact two people. And it's about 26% of or 31,000 older adult households that are at or below that 50% AMI, which those thresholds are here in this table. And so that makes housing cost burden an issue for some older adults for these households in Tucson. So we also compared housing cost burden by age across Tucson, and compared to those 12 Western United States metro areas. And although Tucson does have a lower housing cost burden for those persons that are over 65, it's still 22, almost 23%, and that's still a lot. So we wanted to kind of look at how, we could. The purpose of this gap analysis is to identify that this is a vulnerable population in Tucson, and figure out how we can craft policy to help people. So this also shows, this map here shows where lower income older adult households are by census tract. And we can see that they're in these, where these red and orange tracts are. And what that actually tells us is that where lower income older adult households choose to live is actually a function of the socioeconomic status rather than age. Because these tracts were already considered but in the vulnerability analysis to be vulnerable. We have this information about how older adults are able to use housing assistance. And then this one way down here, we're just showing where older adults are living around Tucson. And so we already knew that we were going to see this, but way down here in the Green Valley area, we have tracts that have very high percentages, over 85% or 90% of the tract is senior households or older adult households. So, but we knew that we were going to find that. And then we have this showing like how the percentage change in older adult households by tract from 2013 to 2018, basically showing us where, if people are migrating, older adults are migrating, where are they migrating to? And we could see, we'll go back to those Green Valley tracts, that actually there's not a lot of change down here because these are already kind of saturated. These neighborhoods, areas down here are saturated, and older adults are actually moving within city limits. There's 128% change here between 2013 and 2018 for older adult households in this tract within the city. And what that's telling us is that they're moving into more central neighborhoods or choosing to remain in central neighborhoods to age in place rather than moving out of the city. So like I said, these other housing by ethnicity and housing by race follow the same format. I highly encourage you to come to this site, click around, think of the questions that you have, personally, or for people that or groups that you're interested in, and click around and really look and to find the answers to the things that you personally are interested in. One thing I do want to note about the gap analysis and ethnicity and race is that we were limited to using the language used by the American Community Survey, which is out of the Census Bureau. Ethnicity in the ACS is categorized as Hispanic or Latino or not Hispanic or Latino. Those are the only two ethnicity categorizations. So housing by ethnicity, by that function, is about how the distribution of the Hispanic population around Tucson. And then race is designated into these categories right here, which are the race categories in the ACS. So one last thing before I'm done, we compared the gaps that we saw to other things, to vulnerability, to the index that we already had. We looked at property tax delinquency because we had that data from Pima County. We looked at the relationship between renter housing cost burden and vulnerability. So here's a map showing that. And then also median house price changes and vulnerability. So just as a final point, I just want to say again, please go to the site and see how you can use the information to help you, your organizations, or just to better understand the regional housing market in the Tucson MSA. So Jennifer, thank you, and let's go to the next presenter.
Great. Thank you so much, Alicia, for all of the insight that you provided today and all of that work that went into Tucson's housing market study. And now I'd like to welcome Ann Shaneka, the Deputy Director for the City of Tucson, Housing and Community Development. Ann oversees planning and affordability housing development for the City of Tucson. She comes to the Housing Department with experience working in the City Manager's Office and for the Department of Transportation and Mobility. She has a master's in public administration from the University of Arizona and was a Peace Corps volunteer in Madagascar. Welcome, Ann. We're excited to hear what you have for us today.
Thanks, and good afternoon, everyone. So first, I want to say a big thanks to the Community Foundation and the MAP Dashboard folks for hosting this today. And a huge thanks to Dr. Kim and Dr. Hammond, who really made that market study a reality. I believe it was Mark that said they're an incredible knowledge center for the region, and I found that to be incredibly true and also fun and easy to work with. I do have a couple slides I'm going to share as part of my presentation. Okay, so I thought I would take a couple of minutes today to talk a little bit about the background of the housing market study and the conversations that happened to lead into it. As you've seen from Dr. Kim presenting the study, there is so much rich data in that study. And so I wanted to just provide some context, as I think it's important to talk about the background and the information in terms of the data sets that were included. I do want to give a thank you to the city's Planning and Development Services Department, and in particular, Corin Manning, who was a big inspiration in terms of the study and really integral throughout the study. And so the picture on this slide, I did choose very intentionally. So part of the impetus for the housing study came from conversations that occurred when the city's planning department was looking at the infill incentive district and looking at changes that needed to be made to it when it was just recently reauthorized. So the infill incentive district is a tool, one of the tools that is used to help spark development in the downtown area. I would also say the streetcar is another tool that has inspired development downtown. So shown here in this picture, you can see the streetcar. You can see the AC Marriott in the background, which I would say is really a symbol of new development downtown. But you can also see what was the Shot in the Dark Cafe there. So the Shot in the Dark is a legacy local business that unfortunately has since closed down. And so during discussions about the infill incentive district, residents in the downtown area expressed concern, and I would say there's more concern even today about the impact that the development downtown has on the local residents and also businesses. So there was growing concern and is growing concern about issues around housing affordability, gentrification, displacement, and really looking at the impact development has. So as the infill incentive district reauthorization was wrapping up, Mayor and Council asked that the city really look at, do an analysis of what the impact of that development has had on downtown. So as that was happening, there was also more growing concern in Tucson and really throughout the nation of rising housing costs. And so recognizing that housing is an important issue, not just in downtown, but citywide and even region-wide, really looked at needing a thorough analysis of our housing market. And so really grateful, as I mentioned, to Dr. Hammond and Dr. Kim for agreeing to take on this project with us and really bringing their expertise to the table. And I'm also really grateful for Pima County, who also jumped in, provided data, and agreed to have this be a region-wide analysis. So I think about the issues the really complex issues that Tucson faces every day in terms of poverty, in terms of equity, of housing affordability and homelessness, and personally feel like these are challenges that we really need more collaboration and need to work together on. And so the housing market study, in my mind, was a really good example of coming together and really doing an analysis together. And so as Dr. Alicia Kim went over it all, I wanted to highlight a few of the ways that we're already using the study and how we foresee using the study in the future to help inform decisions around how we're going to meet the housing demand. So as Dr. Kim went over, the first phase of the market study was developing the Neighborhood Vulnerability Index map, and that's the one on the lower right of this slide. And so we had previous similar maps in the past that showed neighborhood stress, but why I find this one to be different and why I'm really excited to have it is, as Dr. Kim mentioned, it was created using a methodology that other cities are using, peer-reviewed, and really can have some confidence in that data, and it's easily replicable for the future. So previous versions of the map, and you'll see a lot of overlap between the two, but the map on the top left has over 26 variables that went into it. And so trying to replicate that, and then also concern over the efficacy of the data with so many overlapping variables, always had me a little bit concerned. So really grateful to have this map and be able to update it when needed in the future. Some ways that we are already using the map is when we're writing grant applications. So housing community development, no surprise, when we're applying for money, we're usually applying for money for projects or programs in low-income areas. So being able to cite that and show through data that they are vulnerable areas is something that can help us attract funding to invest in those areas. Also, the city does allocate funding for grant funding for projects and programs, and we are building this map into our scoring criteria to really make sure the city's investing in areas with the highest need. And I wanted to go over a recent application and how we're using the map in a way that I think is really important and really exciting. So we all know with COVID, there is a growing concern about evictions. Fortunately, today we heard the eviction moratorium was extended another 30 days, but we know that there is a looming crisis in terms of evictions when the moratorium ends. Both the city and the county received money through the federal government, through the CARES Act and through the rescue plan, to really try to provide relief and provide rent and utilities for low-income residents in the region. And so one of the biggest hurdles in getting the money out is verifying the requirements in terms of how a resident shows that they meet the requirements for the program. And the biggest hurdle is the income verification. So asking vulnerable residents to upload their W-2s and show that they meet the income requirements, you can imagine, is burdensome and can take some time. So fortunately, with the rescue plan, the Treasury Department recognized this hurdle and provided guidance that programs can verify income eligibility through using a fact-specific proxy, is what they called it. And so CIC, the Community Investment Corporation, is the organization that's delivering the program on behalf of the region, and was able to get permission to use the vulnerability index as that fact-specific proxy. So if somebody lives in a census tract that is shown to be is vulnerable, more vulnerable, or most vulnerable, they can self-attest that they meet the income verifications. And so CIC recently told us that that's been a game changer in terms of getting the funding out. So really grateful to have that data and have that map to help. And for all of you on the call today, please know there is still funding available. And if you please share that, that people can apply, tenants can apply, and landlords can apply on behalf of their tenants. And so in terms of looking at housing demand across the city, I think that the gap analysis really has key information that will help us when we're developing strategies. I know Dr. Kim went over this. I wanted to highlight these two graphs as I think they really help paint the picture on where we're at. So the housing cost burden chart there on the top left, a quick glance, you can see that over 60,000 households are housing cost burdened across the region. And not surprisingly, the lower the income category, the higher percentage of housing cost burdened households. And then the diagram on the right, I'm really glad Dr. Kim went over that in a little more detail. As a data geek, I would like to say that you can spend a lot of time playing with this chart. As she mentioned, there's a lot of information, a lot of assumptions that went into it, but I think it really helps show the complexity and the nuance of this. One of the key takeaways I took from this chart is that in addition for the need to have affordable housing, that market rate and workforce housing is also really important and needed to free up those affordable units. And so finally, in terms of affordable housing at the city, we know that this is an issue that is complex and will require multi-pronged solutions to address the need. And so recently, the mayor and council established a commission on equitable housing and development to help guide the city's actions. The commission meets monthly. Anyone's in there, those meetings are open to the public. And recently the commission voted on short-term and long-term goals that the commission would like to see. One of them is that they are going to work towards providing a list of recommendations to mayor and council on how to advance affordable housing development. And so I don't often give Phoenix huge kudos, but I'm gonna in this case. Our neighbors to the north recently went through this process of developing a housing market study similar to the one we've presented today, and then also really looking based on the data, what are the solutions that can really help address the demand in housing. And so in Phoenix, they identified 9 key policy initiatives. Working with our commission on equitable housing and development, we are going to identify for Tucson, what are the strategies that we can take both short-term and long-term to really try to meet the demand for the future. And so even though I'm a planner, I will say that developing those solutions takes time. So we're not going to wait until we have an action plan. We're continuing to move forward with certain actions now. So a few of those actions I wanted to highlight. The city currently owns a lot of properties across the city. And so we are moving some of those sites forward for affordable housing. We have 4 sites that we expect to advance projects on within this year. And then we're also doing a property analysis to prioritize city-owned sites for future affordable housing. Second strategy that we're working on right now, thanks to Planning and Development Services, they have drafted an accessory dwelling unit ordinance to allow the small granny flats and legalize them for the city and make them easier to build in the city. And so that is going through now with a big emphasis on how do we incentivize the ADU development to have there be affordable units with that. A big project that I've been working on is rehabilitating and renovating the Tucson house. So it is the largest public housing site in the city. There's 408 units. We are actively working to making sure that we bring that building to modernizing it and bringing it to today's standard. And then Mayor and Council recently gave us direction on moving more towards self-development and really trying to make sure the city plays an integral role in sparking more affordable housing development. So that is something that we are actively working on as well. And so that's just a crash course in what the city's doing in terms of affordable housing development and how we're using the data sets that U of A worked on to really help us as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne. It was really great to hear the perspective on the challenges the city is facing, and also to hear about the actions the city is taking on housing affordability. Now I'd like to welcome Marcos Ishmael to turn on his video. And Marcos is the Housing Program Manager for Pima County Community and Workforce Development Department. He has over 37 years experience working with community development and housing programs in Tucson and Pima County. He's been with Pima County for over 29 years and is where he oversees the county's affordable housing programs. Prior to his employment with Pima County, he coordinated housing programs at 2 local nonprofit agencies. He currently serves on the board of directors of the National Association for County Community and Economic Development, the Southwest Fair Housing Council, Pima County Community Land Trust, the Arts Foundation for Tucson, in Southern Arizona. And in 2012, he served a 4-year term on the board of directors for the Totem O'odham Nation. Welcome, Marcos.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you, Jennifer. Thank you to the Community Foundation for Southern Arizona for sponsoring this event, and thanks to Dr. Hammond and Dr. Kim for all their hard work and research in putting this tool together for us. So I have just a few slides to share and just kind of to give the county perspective and starting with what led us to participate in this study. And I'll get my screen share up here. Okay, hopefully everybody can see the slides. So, and this first slide here is an overhead of the Curley School in Ajo, Arizona, a historic site that the county played an integral role in helping to redevelop, and I'll talk more about it later on in the presentation. So prior to the recession, our department and our county housing commission was looking at this looming housing crisis and looking at some of the data that we had in 2018-19 from the National Income Housing Coalition. You know, we already were seeing the picture of households that are stressed, paying more than 30% of their income for household rent or towards their mortgage. And so on the right here, so this tool is available again through the National Income Housing Coalition, and you're able to compare Tucson with the state and Phoenix. So we can see how, you know, we've already covered some of this information, but we were looking at this data before, and as you can see here, I also looked at a comparison between 2018 and 19, looking at the percentage of households that were cost burdened, and extremely low income had an increase already going into 2019 from the previous year. We had an increase in the population that was cost burdened at this level, as well as, I thought this was interesting. Oops, I went too fast here. The moderate, what we consider more middle income, 80 to 100%, also experienced an increase in the number of households that are cost burdened, from 15 to 20%. And so I thought that was particularly interesting, and I think is an indication of the affordability crisis. And, you know, other things we were looking at leading into the pandemic recession. And, you know, this is information that was available back in 2019. So the home builders had identified, I'm sorry, my slides are going crazy here. So the National Association of Home Builders surveyed builders, and 84% of the members identified cost and availability of labor as one of the biggest issues. And of course, material prices have since become a big issue as well. And this was happening before the pandemic. As you can see, 23.7% rise in costs. So some other things that we were looking at, let's see. Factors putting pressure on the construction market. the increased price of undeveloped land, home builders and developers focus on high-end housing and versus starter homes. And then when starter homes are ultimately built, their cost is bid up because the demand far exceeds the supply. And again, this was happening back in 2019. And why are we seeing some of these shifts? You know, the number of reasons, you know, the baby boomers are aging, living longer, more independently, leading to a greater number of smaller households. Less housing stock is being freed up since less elderly are moving to assisted living. In some cases, baby boomers are trading down. Again, this was happening before the recession, the pandemic recession. So putting more upward pressure on starter homes. You know, a lot of people were recovering from the foreclosure crisis and ready to move back into home ownership, and only to being faced with these pressures on price and affordability. So, you know, there's a number of reasons, but we're seeing these shifts in generations where we've got different generations competing for the same households, and something that we hadn't seen before. And just a couple of examples of articles from that appeared prior to the recession, again, putting the spotlight on Tucson as home values rose second highest in the nation in 2019. And then again in January 2020, another article highlighting the rising rents and their effect on families with children. And so again, all this was happening before the pandemic, and of course with the pandemic, you know, that just seemed to amplify the crisis. So looking at these numbers from May of 2021, we're still seeing just in you know, I think a lot of industry analysts thought that the pandemic was going to slow down demand, but we've seen just the opposite. And so new home permits, just looking back over the last 3 months, have started to increase. And, you know, in May, there was just a 23% change, but look at April, 108% change compared to the previous April in the number of permits. So these are the number of permits. Oops. Those are the number of permits in this column, and this is the percent change over the previous year. Active listings. So active listings are decreasing at, again, historic rates here. So looking at rental listings in this column on the left, you know, going from May back, again, just past 3 months, you can see the decline in listings peaking in April. And also for home sales, the decline in listings, double the decline in listings for rental listings. So just an indication, again, of the unique market we're in. You know, normally when home values go up, you see a lot of, you know, homeowners deciding to sell, take advantage. But of course, in the midst of a pandemic, that's just not happening. So rents and home prices are continuing to increase at much higher rates than wages. Median home price in May, $287,000. This is Tucson, and increasing from the previous year over 26%. This is from the Tucson, Southern Arizona Housing Market Letter. And this is the most recent report, most recent data available. The price of newly constructed homes has seen a much lower increase, only 7% over the past year compared to 26% on existing homes. So an indication that, you know, these number of permits here and activity on the part of the home builders are doing a little bit better job of keeping up with demand than the existing resale market. 1 year change in average rental cost, 16.8%. Meanwhile, median income actually decreased over the past year by 1%. So this is all kind of just what's brought us to this perfect storm of the affordability crisis that we're seeing now. So how can government help increase the supply? And having a tool. And so when we were looking at what our housing commission could do, they wanted to get data, and the MAP study I think that's why we agreed to enter into it with the city, and to see if we could get some more local data. We already had the national data we were looking at prior to the pandemic, and so having these local this local tool with local data is going to help us be able to target developments going forward and target our activities and initiatives with the city of Tucson and other partners in the region. So, I threw this question out and just threw a couple of the obvious questions in here that we've been looking at, and a lot of these things we've been doing, and we were doing them prior to the Great Recession. If you recall, there was a similar spike in home prices, and so and that led to a lot of activity on the part of the city and the county. So reducing barriers to producing and preserving affordable workforce housing, not just affordable subsidized housing, but as was mentioned previously, housing for working families and for our workforce. And in some examples in recent years, Pima County Development Services has done an excellent job of streamlining our development process. And a few years ago, we were recognized by the Association of Home Builders for our efforts in streamlining the permitting process. And so, and I think there's room for improvement, and we're working closely with our Development Services Department and, seeing what we can do there. And we'll be engaging our Housing Commission as well to work with our Development Services team and our Community Workforce Development Department to also work on developing a regional strategy for affordable housing. Leveraging local and regional resources, we're going to continue and hopefully expand our partnerships with local jurisdictions like the city of Tucson. We plan to have our Housing Commission collaborating closely with the city of Tucson's Commission on Equitable Housing and Development, as well as other partners in the region. We've been working with the town of Sahuarita and addressing their challenges in providing workforce housing in the town of Sahuarita. And so we look to continue to expand those partnerships and collaborations, and looking at ways that we can leverage the federal funding that we get on an annual basis, as well as the federal funding that came to us through the various relief bills in Congress, most recently the American Rescue Plan Act. So the biggest funding tool that we have from HUD is the Home Investment Partnership Program. So here our annual allocation, you can see and we have a consortium partnership with the city of Tucson. And again, the consortium receives about $3 million to $3.5 million annually is what we've been getting. The American Rescue Plan Act is going to provide an infusion of assistance through this Home Investment Partnership Program, specifically to assist homeless and those that are at most risk of homelessness. And so this is about 3 times our annual allocation. And HUD is expected to get this funding out later in this year, hopefully by the fall of 2021. These funds will be coming available to the city, and Pima County and the city of Tucson will be working to leverage these funds and in order to create and preserve affordable housing in our community. And, looking at some of the things we've done in the past, Ann mentioned city land. We've collaborated in the past with the city and local partners like Habitat for Humanity. And this is just one example of a project that was done on city land. This was prior to the Great Recession, again, in an effort to address an affordability crisis that we were facing back in 2006. And Balboa Estates was 36 patio homes with 0 lot lines. So some increased density to help get more housing on the site. And it was a great project. The land was donated by the city of Tucson, and then we used federal funding and leveraged some local resources as well. So we looked apart. This is another project where both the city and county donated land, and partnered with a nonprofit developer, Chicanos por la Causa, to develop a subdivision that included, it was a mixed income subdivision with 37 affordable homes and 24 market rate homes. And this was, again, developed prior to the 2007 recession. And there's been a lot of talk about converting motels, hotels. City and county have experience with that. These developments were, again, sponsored by a developer with support from the city and the county. So the Ghost Ranch Lodge Apartments converted a historic motor court hotel into affordable housing, went on to win lots of national awards and helped spur some additional development and improvements in the Oracle area. There are a lot of vacant school sites in Tucson, and the county undertook a project prior to the Great Recession in one of our rural communities at the historic Curley School, which had become abandoned in Ajo. And the site was developed mixed use development that included 30 low-income housing tax credit units in the former high school at the front part of the property up here. And then in the previous elementary school at the back of the property, there is a convention center and a community garden, and there's also a community kitchen. And so the elementary school has become a conference center and retreat center, and helps promote local businesses as well. And so this is something that could be easily replicated as we're looking to increase the supply of affordable housing in communities where we have vacant schools. And so this is just an example, again, of what can be done. Another example of infill development that was done, this was post recession, completed in 2018, an infill project in Barrio Hollywood with Pima County Community Land Trust on what was previously 3 residential parcels, which you could see right here highlighted in red. Those 3 parcels would have previously housed 3 single-family homes. And what Pima County Community Land Trust did is, with the help of their planners and architects at the planning center, redesigned the 3 parcels to be able to develop 6 single-family homes, as well as providing some space for parking and a little kind of courtyard space here. So just one example of what can be done with infill development. Again, the project was successfully completed in March of 2018. And this is a picture again of the houses and site that was developed. Now, something that we're working on that's under construction right now, another former hotel site, which is being redeveloped to provide both emergency shelter housing for the homeless, and we'll soon have 100 units of permanent supportable housing. So the Center of Hope Apartments will be completed in a few months, developed by La Frontera Partners at the former Holidome Holiday Inn hotel site. And the whole site has been transformed into a campus. The Center of Hope Apartments is one portion of this campus, and you can see here in the bottom right-hand corner of the whole site is, oops, I went too far here. Oh, I apologize here. So I don't know where, let's see. I lost my, is everybody still seeing the screen here? Yipes, okay.
Marcos, we're seeing a GIS map.
Oh, okay. So I don't know what I did, but I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thank you, Marcos. Yeah, sorry about that. Sometimes your PowerPoint gets hidden behind the Zoom app, behind the Zoom webinar. But thank you so much. I know you were just about to wrap up your presentation. Is there anything that you wanted to conclude with?
Well, yeah, you know, the Center of Hope Apartments, you just to conclude there, the permanent housing again is under development, and the site also again has the homeless shelter, which is run by Gospel Rescue Mission, and then there were also two additional buildings that were built for support services to provide employment and training, other support services, and to both the residents of the permanent supportive housing and of Gospel Rescue Mission. So we're looking forward to that. And we're also continuing our partnership with Habitat for Humanity. We've got some homes in the Flowing Wells area, another infill development that they're working on for us, as well as Pima County Community Land Trust, working on another infill development on the west side, just north of Barrio Hollywood. So we hope to continue to, you know, with partnerships to produce more affordable housing and find more creative ways that we can help produce more affordable housing and address the supply issue.
Thanks, Marcos. It was really great to hear how all the projects the county's working on to increase the housing supply, especially the affordable housing supply. Thanks so much for joining us today. Our last speaker of the day is T. Van Hook. She's the CEO of the Habitat for Humanity Tucson. Welcome, Ms. Van Hook. So you've turned your screen share on, your video on. You can start your screen share at any point. Ms. Van Hook is a graduate of the University of Arizona and has spent more than 25 years working with community-based human services, neighborhood housing, and transit programs for public, private, and nonprofit organizations. The majority of her career has been spent leveraging her knowledge and experience to community and government collaborative projects for special needs and low-income populations. Currently, Ms. Van Hook serves on one of Habitat for Humanity International Policy's advisory committees, is one of 2 American champions for Habitat Bangladesh, and is working with international partners through solid ground to influence policy and practices to achieve lasting change and support safe housing around the globe. Ms. Van Hook serves on the board of directors for Arizona Town Hall, Tucson Metro Chamber of Commerce, COPE Community Services, and serves as a committee member or a volunteer for several local nonprofits. Ms. Van Hook is also an active member of the Women's Presidents Organization at Tucson, SABA, and a former member of the National Association of Women in Construction. Under Ms. Van Hook's leadership, Habitat for Humanity Tucson was presented the Affiliate of Distinction Award, the highest honor bestowed on a local organization. Welcome. We're excited to hear your perspective on Tucson's housing market.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. I just want to start by saying that I believe, and I think we've illustrated through all of the data presented, that housing, affordable housing, is basic infrastructure for every community in this country. And when we look at, as we're building infrastructure to attract commerce to our community, to find that balance between appropriate wages and the appropriate cost of housing, looking at housing as infrastructure and neighborhoods as infrastructure is really critical. And I think that that's really important. We know that with affordable housing, health, educational, workforce outcomes are much better. And that when you're in a low income family, the gaps get higher and higher and higher, deeper and deeper. The exchanges between our middle income folks and low income families. This pattern isn't new. We've seen that through the MAP dashboard, and thank you for the longitudinal data. I went back to 1940, looked at adjusted for wages and inflation. What has happened to the Arizona housing market? We don't have Tucson data until the 60s and 70s. And if you looked at the data over a lifetime or two, it's striking. The gap between wages and the cost of housing is growing exponentially. We talked earlier about cost burdened families. The seniors are even higher cost burden, and we're seeing a new trend after COVID that I'll talk about in just a minute. But you know, there's this great song that was dedicated to Gabby Giffords that's really about mass shootings. But there's a line in it that says, you can learn to live with anything when it happens by degrees. And over time, the degree in the gap between housing affordability, wages, and livability in our community has grown exponentially. And even with the corrections in the Great Recession that we talk about, housing prices for low income families haven't adjusted that much. When we look at the lower end of the scale, we see problems. I'll share my screen with you for just two quick slides. This is Solomon Berry and his wife, Fatma. He works as a nurse and RN at a local nursing home. And they live in a Habitat house. He serves on the Habitat board of directors, and they have 4 lovely children. They're just amazing community members. He works to work with the local council office to get things happening, and he's just all about town. He, as a care worker during COVID, shared with us that they have very strict protocols. He comes in through the garage. They have washer and dryer there. He heads straight to the shower and takes really diligent care to separate himself from the family until he knows that he's cleaned up and gone through his entire COVID routine. The COVID crisis has taught us in housing something very important. When we live in inadequate, when we live in overcrowded conditions, when we don't have the appropriate housing that we need to shelter in place, we're putting low-income families at even greater risk. So looking at these neighborhood factors and looking at the vulnerability of these families is important. Mr. Berry shares with us that in their 1-bedroom apartment with the 4 children, prior to having incentivized affordable housing, he couldn't have gone through those protocols. He would have put his family at higher risk and his job would have been at risk. So we know these factors are really important. I love it, and thank you, Anne and Marcos, for sharing the projects that the city is working on. They are, although gargantuan efforts, an amazing investment in our community, a drop in the bucket compared to what we need. The number of seniors living in their own homes that have been unable to provide maintenance and defer that is growing in our community. With COVID, we're seeing that gap get even larger. Someone who might have called Habitat or one of the other agencies to come and fix a dripping cooler, who is a vulnerable person, allowed that drip to happen while COVID was happening. So we're seeing deferred maintenance of 18, 20 months on a project that would have been fixing a roof and replacing an air conditioning a few $1,000s to mold infiltrating, complete rebuilds of roofs, and mold in walls, projects that are going to cost in housing rehab, where an average would have been 11,000, let's say, in the $50,000-$60,000 range, because they've been affected by not getting services through COVID. I wanted to talk longitudinally just for a second about the cost or the gap in housing for a Habitat home. We looked at 2016 through 2020, or the houses that have been closing this year during the pandemic. We mapped out these slides, and I can show you. The orange line at the bottom is the median income in Pima County. The blue line is the income for the families that we have been serving since 2016. The red line, the average appraised value, and this is all of the same house. It's what we call a 1301. It's a 1,301 square foot house built somewhere within Pima County, either in the city of Tucson, unincorporated Pima County, or in Marana. That house was built using the same methodologies. And the average appraised value has gone in 5 years from 127,000 to our most recent sales at 233,000. To tell you how prices are jumping, we have a 4-bedroom model as well. We sold one in February with an appraisal of $245,000. We have one currently slated to close. And this week, the appraisal came back on the same house, on the same street, 3 months later at $160,000 or $260,000, a $15,000 increase in just a couple of months. This green line is really for our purposes, but it's what we budgeted the cost of a house at. And then the blue line is what it actually cost us to build the house. Land costs, the cost of permitting and impact fees. Impact fees have changed in the city and county over time, and we're paying a larger share or not participating in the incentive program at all because of changes in the ordinance. And the material costs have really grown exponentially. All of this really leads to some serious issues in affordable housing and in the future of affordable housing. We don't see this trend changing with the number of people who need a major repair to their home and cannot afford it, the number of folks that we are getting calls from, everything that you're seeing statistically continues. I think when we look at all of the data that was presented by Dr. Kim, and we slice into those below the median line, we're going to see that the gap in wages, the gap in skills ability and employability is growing. And so right now, from the nonprofit perspective, my peers and preparing for this, I talked to folks at several agencies. The number of calls we're getting for both rental assistance, mortgage assistance, assistance with repairs has grown exponentially over the last 10 years, but in the last year has accelerated to rocket speed. As federal dollars are released, they are being gobbled up by families in need much faster than I think anyone really anticipated. So the outlook on the housing market is not terrific. The cooperation between agencies, the cooperation with the city and county, the ability for us to work together is there. The dollar amounts are not. One thing I want to say, and I'm very grateful about this project, about the study, about it being available online for folks to look at. We have learned over the last 18 months or so that home is everything. It's your gym, it's your school, it's the place where you seek shelter. And now may be a time where, when the public is aware of what is happening, that we are able to make some systemic changes to housing in Southern Arizona. But at this time, I'm not seeing that even our gallant efforts are keeping up even remotely with increasing needs. And so I know we're short on time. I will leave it at that. And thank you all again for having me as part of this presentation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Van Hook, especially for speaking to the challenges that families have faced over this last year and a half during the pandemic. I'd now like to open up the webinar to questions. So I'd ask all of our speakers to turn their videos back on. And I'll start our first question with you, T. And that is, you have talked about the effects of the housing crisis on families and service providers. What can Tucsonans do to support efforts to provide affordable housing?
Thank you for that question. You know, the last bond question that went to Pima County voters to support housing failed. I think raising awareness, looking at the dashboard, looking at the data that's presented, making up your own mind, and then if you're with us, really sharing that with your neighbors, talking about it, supporting city and county initiatives, and supporting agencies that are providing along the entire continuum from homeless services to permanent home ownership for families is really critical.
Thank you for that. Alicia, I have a couple questions for you regarding updating the data. So I'll just ask one question here, and that is, we know that the pandemic had an impact on the housing market. Do you have plans to update the housing market study in the future?
So yeah, that is definitely one thing over the course of the year that we were working on the project that we considered. Luckily, this same data, the ACS survey, is done by a census every year. And so we will have information available for all of 2020 that doesn't become available until December of this year to really look at what we would call the pandemic year. And then, of course, it also depends on availability of funding and things like that. But the way that we built this dashboard, but these sites, all we have to do is download the new data and kind of repopulate it. So we built it to be replicable, so that at some cadence, whatever is decided, that we could update that so that we can see not only the pandemic year, but also the recovery years after.
Okay, and great. And a follow-up question. Somebody was wondering if you have plans to extend this research throughout Southern Arizona and Western Pima County.
So it currently covers Western Pima County. So this research covers all of Pima County. I know that the maps, when we built the maps and how they're displayed on the site, they focus on the city of Tucson, or kind of around the boundaries of the city of Tucson. But if you just zoom out just a little bit, then you'll see Western Pima County. So all of the measurements and all of the metrics that we use are for every single tract in Pima County, which is 241 total census tracts. Or if you also click on those full screen options, then you'll see that the full county there. I'm not sure, we haven't yet received interest in expanding this to other counties around Southern Arizona. But like I said about being able to update the data for future years, it's also, everything that we did is replicable so that we could expand it to other counties or other locations, or like chosen census tracts pretty easily, just once those are identified.
Okay, thanks, Alicia. And at the end, when we finish up with question and answers, I'll go to the MAP dashboard website and I'll show everyone how to access the housing market study from the homepage of the MAP dashboard.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Anne, I was wondering, you mentioned that you've been developing an affordable housing strategy. Can you provide an example of what types of action you expect might be included as part of that strategy?
Yeah, so in terms of looking at what Phoenix did, I would say there'll be strategies that are geared more towards short term and some that are geared more towards long term. So an example, and this will be vetted with the commission and really leaning on them as partners in this, but an example of a low hanging one, Marcos mentioned that the county is doing a good job of streamlining their permitting. And so at the city, we are seeing, due to the rising development, we are seeing more lengthier permitting in terms of the timeline on receiving a permit. So one of the things that I would like to see is the city formally adopting a policy that affordable housing projects will be expedited in terms of the permitting process. So that's an example. Long-term, T mentioned the affordable housing bond. I think I've had my eye on what some other cities are doing. So for instance, Austin recently passed funding for a high capacity transit system, and in it included funding for anti-displacement measures and affordable housing. So really thinking through, when the city is working on funding initiatives, how do we make sure that we build affordable housing into those?
Great. Thank you. Marcos, I was wondering why existing home prices are increasing at a higher rate than new home prices.
I think that boils down to the lack of supply and just the, I think so many homeowners are not entering the market right now. Homes are selling quick. If you put your home on the market, it's going to sell quick. And, looking at where you're going to rent or buy next, becomes challenging, especially if you've got a mortgage to pay off. You may not have enough money left to rent or buy the home that you would like to. So I think a lot of people have just been holding back and, putting off that move. And so, I don't think we're going to see some relief until the resale market listings start to normalize and get back to what, a normal market looks like.
Right. And T, do you want to, you made a comment there. Do you want to expand on that, the shortage in the labor market?
Sure. I think there are a couple of things that there's supply chain, as a home builder, we're experiencing supply chain interruptions. There was a little bit of slowing in permitting, both at the city and county during the pandemic, because of quick pivots in the way we are submitting and doing permitting, which they've worked diligently to correct. But it does create a small lag in the market. And we have a labor shortage in Tucson. So the trades and skilled craftsmen, you're having to wait for, they're rationing concrete. There's a wood shortage. There's an appliance shortage. So we see a lot of housing going up, but it's a little slower. The 3-month build time has extended, and for some builders, the development time has extended. So I think we're going to see an increase in the number of new construction homes sold. It's just the market's got to balance out. And while the market is hot, there's availability in resale homes at this point.
Right. We have a follow-up question, I think, that I'll send to ask all of you, and feel free to chime in. That is related, is the supply of new housing is perhaps the major reason for rental rates and home price increasing so quickly. More supply would bring down prices, but there are many roadblocks to preventing this, such as zoning and local ordinances, constraints, permit fees, and contractor requirements. What can be done to mitigate these constraints so more units can be put in the supply chain? Feel free to jump in, any of you.
Well, I think, we talked about in improving, streamlining permitting process, changes, in zoning, relaxing zoning requirements, not just for affordable housing, but for all development, is going to help. So, that's one thing.
Yeah, I agree that this is going to require a lot of different solutions. And so that's, in thinking about developing a strategy, I think that we need to chip away. And the accessory dwelling unit ordinance is one example of it. It's in some ways maybe a small thing, but it's one of the tools that I think can help. And I think we have to look at any tools that are available to us at this time.
I would agree. I think that it takes a balance of looking at land use, looking at access to capital, looking at the availability of communities of opportunity. Where can we do infill? Where can we work with neighbors to provide the type of housing or the type of need that they need in those particular areas in this high stress neighborhoods? And really getting buyers ready, or getting incentives ready for first-time home buyers or people who have been traditionally excluded from the market because of either policy or generational poverty.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of you. I think we've run a little over, so I think we'll stop questions there. I'm going to, for those that have time, I'm going to pop up the MAP dashboard website, show you how to find the Tucson markets housing study, and then also a few other housing resources that we have available on the MAP dashboard. So I am going to screen share now, and those of you who have your video on, you can turn them off if you'd like. So here you can see the MAP dashboard website. Somebody type in if you can't. Okay, so here is the MAP dashboard website. If you scroll down just a little bit, once you get to the landing page, you'll find this Tucson housing market study. If you click on that link, it will take you to the housing market study that Alicia spoke about today, and you can click through all of these different links here. And if we click on one, I'll show you what Alicia mentioned here with one of the maps. So if we go into this map, we can zoom out and it will populate all of Pima County there. So you can look at all of the different census tracts for Pima County. You can kind of zoom in there anywhere you want and drag the map around. So a ton of information there for all of Pima County, not just the city of Tucson. If we go back to the home page here, I'll point out a couple core indicators that we have on the MAP dashboard. The first being housing affordability, that's under the economy category. If you click on that, this data is updated annually. This looks at affordability for families earning the median family income, so a little bit higher than that household income value. But you can see that when we compare Tucson to our 11 other metros, that Tucson ranks first there. This data is updated annually. Like I've just mentioned, we do revise it as the quarterly data comes up. So we just revised this as the second quarter data came out. And occasionally we will add the quarterly data, like we have been seeing that affordability has been decreasing in 2021, first quarter of 2021. So we will later on probably add that quarterly data down here to that annual trend. And you can click on these comparison links and it will provide you with data for all of the different geographies that we explore on the MAP dashboard. For the case of housing affordability, we only look at the US and those 12 metropolitan areas. But for other indicators like housing cost burden, we look at 38 core geographies. So we have data for the US, the 10 Western states, the 12 metropolitan areas, and all 15 Arizona counties. And you can find that here in the comparison page. So this data really drills down, looks at housing cost burden, like Alicia did in the Tucson housing market study, by tenure, by age, by race and ethnicity. You can find some of that on the summary page and for all of these core geographies. And we update this data annually. It comes out in December. So we will have 2020 data available in mid to late December for this particular indicator. There was some questions also about some of the smaller communities, City of Tucson, Sarita, Marana, in the chat. And I wanted to mention that we have a Southern Arizona communities piece that we publish annually. And so this is an overview at the different community levels. So we have all of the CDPs, we have Catalina Foothills, census designated place, we have Marana, we have Green Valley, we have Sarita, all of that information. And if you click on that link, it will go to those different reports. And throughout the year, we'll do special housing reports at the community level from the Census Bureau data. So you can find any housing related articles at the community and town level here. And then we write several feature articles throughout the year on housing. You can find all of them. They'll be tagged under the economy category. If you click on economy, you can see the last one we wrote here was Rent Our Own, the demographics of housing in Tucson. And that looked at the share of owner-occupied and renter-occupied housing by census tract for the entire state of Arizona. So you can click on that and you can look at in your neighborhood, in your census tract, what percentage of homes were owner-occupied versus renter-occupied. We have an upcoming article on the MAP dashboard that we'll publish within the next 2 weeks on home prices. We know we've seen about 11% increase in home prices between 2019 and 2020. We'll look at how Tucson compares to the other 11 metropolitan areas and kind of what that means going forward. You'll be able to find that here in this spot. Once this housing market study moves out of this slot, you will be able to find it down here kind of as a permanent icon, just like this one, that you'll be able to click on it and it will take you there. And I encourage you, if you haven't already, to subscribe for MAP updates. It's a great way to find out about the map talks that we have, our data updates when our housing related data updates, and when we publish housing related articles. And so with that, I would like to thank everyone for attending today, and we look forward to you joining future MAP events. And I hope you all have a great day. Bye-bye.